I Like Me Better by LeilahMoon, read by Ella Mabella. Chapter 16. We've made it to year 3. Woohoo! Hermione was walking down the corridor of the Hogwarts Express with Harry and Ron and her new cat, looking for an empty compartment. They were on their way back to school after the summer holidays, and already Harry had a glint in his eyes that almost certainly meant he had something secretive to tell them. They let themselves into a compartment with one other occupant, a man sitting fast asleep next to the window. The stranger was wearing an extremely shabby set of wizard's robes, which had been darned in several places. He looked ill and exhausted. Though quite young, his light brown hair was flecked with grey. Hermione immediately noticed a small, battered suitcase, which read, Professor R.J. Lupin. She wondered what he was doing travelling on the train, which was normally exclusively reserved for students. As they sat down, Ron asked, "So, what were you going to tell us?" Harry told them about overhearing Mr. and Mrs. Weasley's argument to do with Sirius Black and the warning Mr. Weasley gave him. Hermione had her hands over her mouth. "Sirius Black escaped to come after you? Oh, Harry, you'll have to be really, really careful. Don't go looking for trouble." "I don't go looking for trouble," said Harry, nettled. "Trouble usually finds me." Hermione wasn't entirely sure about this, but chose to hold her tongue. Merlin, she thought, Draco's going to have a field day when he hears this. The trio spoke a little more about Sirius Black before moving on to discussing Hogsmeade. Hermione was frustrated that she had to try and dissuade the boys from sneaking Harry into the village. The Hogwarts Express moved steadily north, and the scenery outside the window became wilder and darker, while the clouds overhead thickened. Mid-afternoon, just as it had started to rain, Hermione heard familiar footsteps echo in the corridor. "Well, look who it is," drawled Draco Malfoy, pulling open the compartment door. "Potty and the Weasel." Crabbe and Goyle chuckled trollishly. Hermione caught Draco's eyes and couldn't help but smile, despite the new nicknames he had invented for her friends. His eyes twinkled mischievously when he looked at her. He'd been tolling up and down the corridor looking for his friend. Draco continued, "I heard your father finally got his hands on some galleons this summer, Weasley. Did your mother die of shock?" Ron stood up so quickly he knocked Crookshank's basket to the floor. Professor Lupin gave a snort. "Who's that?" said Draco, taking an automatic step backwards. "New teacher," Hermione replied. Harry got to his feet in case he needed to hold Ron back. What were you saying, Malfoy?" Draco's eyes narrowed. Despite wanting to spend time in Hermione's company, he wasn't fool enough to pick a fight right on the teacher's nose. "Come on," he muttered frustratedly to Crabbe and Goyle, and they disappeared. Moments later, the train began to slow down. Hermione was surprised. She hadn't long checked her watch, and they still had a fair way to travel. Suddenly, they jolted to a stop. Distant thuds and bangs told them that the luggage had fallen out of the racks. Then, without warning, all the lamps went out, and they were plunged into total darkness. The ensuing chaos was amusing to begin with, especially when Neville and Ginny piled into their compartment. There were body parts everywhere, and most of them ended being trodden on, sat on, and elbowed at least once. The atmosphere quickly changed, however, when they were introduced to a Dementor. Hermione felt nauseous as she laid eyes on the cloaked figure standing in the compartment doorway. Its face was completely hidden beneath the hood, and a glistening, grey, slimy-looking hand protruded from the cloak. An intense cold swept over them all, and Hermione saw Harry suddenly freeze and fall to the floor. Professor Lupin strode to the doorway and cast a spell, whilst Hermione dropped to her knees. "Harry! Harry!" He was twitching, and Hermione could feel a cold sweat building across his forehead. She held onto him as she shook, and, after what felt like hours, he finally opened his eyes. With the help of Ron, she heaved Harry back onto his seat and moved to check on Ginny. Harry was questioning the others about their reaction to the Dementor. He was embarrassed, she could tell. Draco didn't help matters once they arrived at the castle. He had brushed past her to reach Harry and block his way up the stone steps. "You fainted, Potter. Is Longbottom telling the truth? You actually fainted?" He was very aware that this wasn't his most eloquent jab, but it was the only time he could be near Hermione. Just being in her vicinity gave him a sense of peace he rarely felt elsewhere. He quickly gave up his taunting, however, as Hermione was called out of the crowd by Professor McGonagall. Harry joined her, but she looked back briefly to give Draco a small smile. Hermione knew why she had been summoned to see the head of Gryffindor, and once Harry had been dismissed, she excitedly waited to receive the item she coveted. "Miss Granger," Professor McGonagall said, "you are still certain this is what you wish to do?" "Oh, yes, Professor. I've been reading all about time turners and their rules over summer. I can tell you everything I've learned, if that would be helpful." No, that's quite all right, thank you." Minerva McGonagall was unhappy about providing a third-year student with such a dangerous item, particularly for something such as taking extra classes. Professor Dumbledore had, however, insisted it was for the best, and who was she to argue with the headmaster? Minerva really hoped that Albus knew what he was doing. Hermione beamed as she was given the object attached to a thin gold chain. Carefully she placed it around her neck, hiding it beneath her shirt. "All right, Miss Granger, please do be careful," Professor McGonagall said kindly. "Now, let's get ye and Mr. Potter to the feast." A few weeks into term, Hermione and Draco were set together at their usual spot in the library. Hermione was keenly aware that they were set slightly closer than usual. She thought there was something different about him this year. He was certainly taller than her now, and his shoulders had filled out a bit. Draco had also stopped gelling his hair so excessively, and Hermione was surprised to find he liked the way it fell into his eyes. "Are you staring at me, Granger?" She blushed. "I'm just looking at a stupid piece of hair on your face. How can you even see with it flopping around like that?" Draco pushed his slender fingers through his hair, ruffling it all up. "Better." Hermione muttered, looking away. How did that make him look even cuter? "So, what did you think of divination?" he asked curiously. This at least took her mind off her own treacherous thoughts. "Oh, Merlin, it was the most ridiculous lesson I've ever been in. Who is Professor Trelawney kidding? The whole subject seems very woolly. She predicted Harry would die this year based on tea leaves, for goodness sake." Draco smirked. "Hermione Granger not liking a lesson. What has the world come to?" She narrowed her eyes. "Oh, yes, and what do you think of divination, Draco Malfoy?" "Utter crap, that's why I'm not taking it." Hermione huffed and started pulling more parchment from her satchel. "Granger," Draco said, his chin brushing against her shoulder, "they've messed up your timetable. Look, they've got you down for about 10 subjects a day. Even you couldn't manage that." "I'll manage. I fixed it all with Professor McGonagall." "What are you on about? You can't take divination, muggle studies, and arithmancy all at 9 o'clock. "Don't be silly," Hermione said shortly. "Of course, I won't be in 3 classes at once." "Well then, Draco, please, just leave it." He glared at her. Why was she hiding something from him? "Tweedledee and Tweedledum might not press any further, but I'm not them." "How do you know about Alice in Wonderland?" she queried. Draco waved his wand. "Lewis Carroll was a wizard, clearly. Don't change the subject." "Please just trust me." "Fine, but you owe me." Hermione knew what he wanted. "Oh no, not that." Grinning, Draco shrugged. "Your secret or my plan?" "Draco, it's not fair on Harry to prance around the school pretending to be a Dementor. It was awful to see him on the train." He leaned back in his chair nonchalantly. "Your choice." Fine. You do your stupid prank, but it can't last long, and no fighting afterwards." Hermione had never quite appreciated the phrase, "the cat who got the cream," until seeing Draco's face in that moment. She sighed wearily. This boy would be the end of her. To be continued. Thank you for listening to today's chapter of I Like Me Better by LeilahMoon, read by LeilahMoon. If you would like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, AO3, Instagram, or Tumblr.